Welcome to Sunrise Life, the podcast where we have deep conversations with fellow freelance models. And today I have a little bit of a different episode with the studio director at the Union 206 studio in Washington, D.C. She is a female studio director, and we have been in touch pretty closely the last few weeks because I have an upcoming trip to Washington, D.C. And it just so happens that I just counted like 7 or 8 shoots at your studio when I'm gonna be there in March. So I'm just like, kinda joked. I was like, "Maybe I should just move in." But I was so happy that Tiffany decided that she wanted to do an interview about her journey, her past modeling, why she got out, and then how she became a studio owner and, like, all of the fun and exciting adventures that have happened with her along the way. So thank you, Tiffany, for doing this podcast episode with me.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've been aware of your podcast for a while, and when I saw that you were coming, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I totally have to get on this podcast." And I'm super thrilled that you've got so many shoots at the studio. I love seeing models on your podcast and then going, "Oh, I know her. She totally came through." So I'm glad that you have so many at the studio.
Yeah, thank you. You know, we are just kind of like a little community of people that it almost feels like everybody knows everybody.
Yeah, totally. And, when I see other models, I'm like, oh, have you been on the podcast? And, oh, come be a featured model for me. So I do, I really love this community. When I was modeling, there was not really a community like this. So I love how it's grown.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Can you reflect on back when you first started modeling, like what was going on in your life at the time that you started, and then kind of talk about how your career progressed until you ended?
So I've been in and around studios since 1993. It was a month after I turned 18. And back then, long before the internet, there were like free weekly newspapers that you'd pick up at cool places like bookstores and record stores back when those were a thing. And there used to be this one in DC called the City Paper. And every Thursday it came out and they had a back page. And so I would read it because I was cool and hip. And there was an ad for Models Wanted. And I thought it was sad, as so many young women do. And so I went because I was like, oh, he's just going to prove it, right? I'm just going to, he will never take me. And so I didn't know anything because models weren't like a known thing. So I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I show up at this dude's house and he's like, do you want to undress here or in the bathroom? And so I just went on this weird autopilot. So I went in the bathroom and I took off my clothes, and I had never done anything like this before. I was modest. I didn't sleep around or anything with like boyfriends. And so it was just really weird just doing it. So this guy, he was an artist and he photographed models so he could paint them. So I came out of his bathroom wearing his robe that he had hung on the door. And I just stood there in his house, like standing next to a bookshelf, sitting on his couch and stuff like that. And he photographed me. And I remember just not really having any emotions about it, just going, okay, I'm doing this thing here. And so he got what he needed and he gave me like, I don't know, maybe like $20. And in 1993, $20 was kind of a lot of money. I was in the foster care system. And so I had just aged out of foster care. So I get $20 and I leave. And I'm like, wait a minute. Because I was working at a dry cleaner and minimum wage back in those days was probably something like $4 maybe.
Whoa.
And so I get $20 and I'm like, all I had to do was take my clothes off and like, this was more than what would cost to fill up my gas tank. I'm like, hey, I think there's a thing here. So every week I would get the city paper and I would call these people. And there wasn't really a thing checking references. And I mean, I know that it would be horrifying now to think of not doing that, but like you could meet them at the mall. Starbucks wasn't a thing. You could meet them at the library or something and, see if they're okay. And so in the early days, this was back when goth was not an accepted thing. And so I had tattoos and piercings that I got right when I was 18 and combat boots and stuff. And so I was doing art modeling, fine art. And at that point, I was like, oh, this is art. Sometimes I got paid for it, but sometimes I was just doing it because it was punk rock and cool. The photos were awesome. And then, in getting money, like any money that I got for it was more than I was making at work. And so then I had a boyfriend who didn't want to have a job. And so he wanted me to go work at Hooters. And punk rock and Hooters don't work. So we went to lunch at Hooters. And I was like, oh, I'm not exploiting myself like that. Because the fine art, black and white modeling was way, way different than the kind of atmosphere you have at Hooters.
Yeah.
And I just didn't really put them together because there was no glamour modeling. Any like glamour was sold in a magazine that was wrapped in plastic. And you didn't have any outlets to see any glamour modeling. So I'm like, no, I'm not getting a job at this, even though I probably wouldn't have been hired. So then rent was due. We were super broke. So then I got a job as a stripper. And then I'm like, my whole life becomes if I put on makeup, put on some wig, look, I'm getting money. And of course, I quit my job as a dry cleaner. And it became about like a kid coming out of foster care. I didn't have any family support. All of a sudden, people are making me feel beautiful and I'm getting all this money. And what am I doing for it? Smiling and acting pretty, which was super awesome. So I ended up modeling had kind of over the years evolved. I was still answering ads in the back of paper. Craigslist had not come out yet.
Wow.
So the internet, one model place was like the big deal. My OMP ID was 4 digits long and began with a 1.
Wow.
So it was that long ago. So their model mayhem was a thing. But back then, they were like message boards. And so I live around DC and there's not a ton of photographers around. So I started traveling. And there weren't really like featured traveling models. Like that wasn't a thing. And so those of us that were traveling you would just write up like a headline and it would be like, and I was doing fashion and not, I was advertising for fashion, but not getting it. I was doing fetish and I wasn't really doing spreads or anything at first. And so I would say like, I think I said like fashion, fetish, erotica. And that kind of went together as like a catchy headline. And then you would put in your headline in your city. And then you would like type up your little, here's what I do, here's my rate. And models back then, everybody was making $100 an hour. And so as an aside, when I see models today making $150 an hour, I'm like, the rates really haven't gone up that much. It's kind of stuck.
Yeah.
So I ended up, so what you would do is you would post your travel on these forums, and the forums were national. So people from all over the place were looking at this very small group of websites. And then people would write you back. So I got into fetish because it paid really well. And so I did tons and tons of pay site work. And I Google myself, my stage name that I use, not all the time. Every once in a while, I'll go down a rabbit hole. And I Googled myself maybe over the summer. And these people are recycling photo sets that are easily from like 2002.
Oh my gosh.
And I mean, the hairstyles haven't really changed. Like, people still look the same. But I'm like, really? You have no new women? out of all of the women that have been around from then until now, you can't find new people to use that aren't 50 years old now.
Oh my god.
So, so I did a lot of pay sites. Over the course of the years, when magazines were still a thing, I not hooked up, but I got connected with a photographer who was connected with a publishing company that put out like tons of adult magazines. And these were like all kinds of different adult magazines with names you wouldn't recognize, but they had different features like giant boobs and legs and feet and all these different kinds of things. But they were pretty much porn where you've got the toys and all the things that we think of as like explicit. And so I ended up doing a bunch of magazine work. I had along the way a centerfold and Easy Rider.
Sweet.
And back then, like now we can kind of tell like what's a model doing by how many followers she has. And this was long, long, long before caviar. So when you got into a magazine, because caviar wasn't a thing, this was like the real deal. And so if you were like listing your resume, you could say, magazine cover, and it really meant something. It would be like the models that have X amount of 100,000 followers. So I had this like, there wasn't a following really. So there's no way to equate. I had this many thousands of followers, but I had like the video box covers and the magazine covers and all of the multi-page spreads. And so that was super cool. I had a lot of fun, but the problem was that I couldn't maintain a relationship and I didn't really have like my social life suffered because if you are full time, if your entire life is devoted to getting shoot, going to the gym, making sure that, you would do your salon services and all this stuff, you don't have a lot of time for like, I couldn't find girlfriends that were, I really couldn't find any girlfriends
Yeah.
because everybody's busy. And women at that time, there was no such thing as OnlyFans. And at that time, modeling, basically taking your clothes off for money was not in the mainstream.
Yeah.
And so how do you meet people and like say you work in an office or something? So there was this one Valentine's Day when I was like at the top of the world as far as I had just got some huge modeling achievements and I had a website and so I had fans and I had like people fans were different back then as far as the way that you could communicate with people. There was no Amazon wasn't a thing back then. But I had like people would mail me things to my PO box, and I had this like mail people knew me at the post office. I had this crammed PO box this one year with like all of these things, and I sat at home by myself on Valentine's Day, and I'm like, this really sucks. And so I started when I was in my late 20s, and I was just feeling like the top because I looked great and I was getting all this stuff, but I was having panic attacks. And at that point, I was cocktailing at a strip club to have like 2 or 3 days a week of like steady income. And then it was flexible so I could go out and travel. And I was starting to like the older that we get, there's going to be 18 to 22-year-olds coming up every single year.
Oh yeah.
We are always going to be getting close to 30, getting close to 40. And back then, the bar was different. So back then, Instagram did not allow anybody to be a model. Like, I know that we see a lot of women basically taking modeling jobs, but are not models. They're not working for it. They're not taking care of themselves. They are not serious about it.
Mhm.
And they're like undercutting and charging really low. And so we do not get the work. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, I've seen it in especially cities like Los Angeles and Miami and Las Vegas where there are people who don't model full time, where they have some other job or they want to break into modeling and they're just willing to shoot for free. And so photographers in those networks, like they don't want to pay normal rates for professional traveling models. It's kind of hard to convince somebody what the value of a professional traveling model is if they're so used to just working with local models.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes the quality of those local models is a little different than somebody who's focused their entire life and their craft on this. And so pay sites were a thing where you could kind of make money steadily. But I had done, I was doing a lot of fetish, like I mentioned, and the damsel in dis and I had done a bunch of damsel in distress, but the more you do it, the more they want you to do worse things.
Mhm.
And I wasn't really doing a lot of erotica except for like the magazine work because otherwise you end up like shooting in some dude's basement. Like he pulls out a white button down shirt for you to wear. And like, how many times can you come up with poses on somebody's stairs? So I started to realize like I am pushing 30. I have nothing. Like, you can't fill out a job application with a centerfold. Right? You can't fill out a job application with video box covers, etc. So I kind of was at this crossroads where I thought, okay, I have no resume. I have no job experience except a strip club. I have all of these things that make me a really valuable model, but not a valuable person when you put your clothes on and take off the makeup. So I started having these panic attacks and I, and then I would quit. And so there was one when I quit and I got a job at Whole Foods. And I think I was making at that point like 12 bucks an hour and I couldn't afford to buy new contacts. And then I ended up going back because I didn't have any job experience. What kind of job could I get? Nothing. So I went back to modeling. And I always had this dilemma where I was like, I'm going to make $12 an hour, Barnes and Noble, Whole Foods, or something like that. Or I'm going to go work for, at that time, $100 an hour, 125 an hour. That's a no brainer.
Yeah.
I just started to reach a limit where I couldn't do it anymore. And so I would quit and go back and quit and go back. And then I ended up like thinking, oh, I'm going to go to a school, right? And so I was in school to be like a medical assistant or something like that. And this was years ago, but in one of the classes, and of course I got straight A's and it was awesome. I was going to have a real job. But in one of the classes, one of the teachers was proud to tell us that we could be making up to $15 an hour when we complete that. I did not go back.
15.
Yeah, and that was a long time ago, but I ended up owing like $11,000. It was like a private tech college. And so I had just made all these attempts to leave. And then finally, I had a roommate who was supportive of my effort. So he was like, okay, go to school and I'll help you out. And so I ended up getting a business degree. And I was always looking for like a quick thing, right? Because modeling is quick, easy money. And I had been doing it for so many years. So this was maybe 2005, and online school was not a thing yet. So there were a couple of schools that were just starting to do online school. So I ended up getting a business degree. And then I got that in 2 years because I had done some community college. And then I ended up with my business degree, getting a job that I could afford to live on. And so here I am, over 30, with an entry level business job. And I am very fortunate that I have used prescription retinols and sunblock since I was very, very young. So I look a little younger than my age. So I was in entry level office job with people that were way younger than me, but it was fine. So the thing about working in corporate is that you can't tell them that you did modeling. You can't tell them that you did anything like this. So I was walking around with this big, big secret. And this was still, all, and so I graduated in 2007. And OnlyFans wasn't a thing, but I was always like, okay, if one of my bosses comes to me and says, "Oh, we somehow found you," I was always going to be like, "Why were you looking at that?" So it never happened. So I went back and forth. My office job still, it was really, really hard to maintain living the way I wanted to live and, not have the modeling money. So I was back and forth with office jobs and just shooting on the weekends and sometimes in the evenings. And in around 2011, I I had gone back and I had my boyfriend broke up with and moved out. And now all of a sudden, from not modeling for a while, I had to go back to it. And so I started up. I called out my old photographer. And even in 2011, I think Instagram was invented in 2011. So the scene was pretty much the same as it was when I was shooting, when I was originally shooting. I was able to pick back up and I still had all my old costumes. And so there was a new studio in my area and I had, how as a model, we will like cold call somebody, send an email, and we'll say, "Hey, I'd love to work with you. Here's my rates." And so I did that, as we all do. And you know how some photographers will email back and be like, "Well, if you want to work with me, here's my rate." Yeah. Like, whatever, dude. I'm just trying to make my living here, as they are also. And so there was this new studio back in those days in the DC area. There were very, very few studios around, and mostly you shot in hotels or people's houses. And so this photographer took me to this new studio and he introduced me to the owner. And I realized that I had emailed the owner. Much later, I realized I had emailed him and said, "Oh, hey, here's my rates." And he emailed back and he's like, "Well, here's mine." And I'm like, "Oh, sure, buddy." So the photographer introduces me to the owner of Union 206 Studio. And I ended up, so he saw that I was responsible. He saw that I showed up for shoot. And we all know that models have a reputation for being flaky. We all know that, some models don't show up, some models cancel. And so he saw that I was showing up for my shoot. And I started, after a shooting at Union 206, the very original location, I realized like it's safe here, it's clean. I don't want to shoot anywhere else. And so I started steering all of my shoots to Union 206. And then so I started kind of becoming friendly with the owner. And it wasn't romantic. It was just me saying, "Oh, I need to get in with this guy because it's business, right? If he thinks I'm responsible and professional, I'm going to get some money out of him in the form of shoot." This is like a networking thing. The better I do, the better I look as far as being professional, the more he will want to hire me for things or refer me. So I would, but then I was also having these panic attacks because I was at the end of my friggin' rope. After going and doing this was 2011. I'd been modeling pretty much since 1993.
Wow.
And I was at 2011. At that point, I had been out of it for a little bit. I'd had the taste of corporate. I'd had a taste of being really good at something that did not involve me taking my clothes off. And coming from foster care and having this experience of, growing into an adult and having all of this validation as I am worthwhile when I am pretty and naked. Having that really screwed with my head. And so getting into the world of my project for work that I completed with praise, and I'm like, oh, I can do something people think is good and it didn't involve being pretty. So that's a whole new novelty that I really hadn't experienced. So coming back into modeling when I got dumped, it was by necessity. And I was just having this really hard time with everything because I thought, is this the way my life is going to be? I don't, I live in Washington, D.C. area. It's really expensive here. How do I manage my life? And so I would start crying after my shoot. And I wasn't breaking down during the shoot, or managing just like a professional when I was shooting. But after my shoots, I would just go into his office and cry. And we had no romantic involvement at that time. He's just like, oh my God, you poor thing. That's not. So we had started to become close, but we hadn't dated or anything at all like that. There was no, nothing between us, but we were developing this thing. And it's one of those fantastic things that develops non sexually. And so I was just at the end, we have a member here at Unit 206 who shoots pretty regularly, and he was my last shoot. And he doesn't know, but after our shoot, I just went into Charles's office and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I have no plan whatsoever. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I cannot do this anymore. I think that the member had brought a second photographer and like sprung it on me. So Charles and I are driving to IKEA and we're going to get some stuff for the studio. And I start crying, having another panic attack. I'm like, oh my God, I have shoots scheduled. I don't know what to do because I'm straddling this world where I have a corporate job, but I can't afford my life without this part-time income. And so he turns to me and he's like, if you do not want to do modeling anymore, I will make it so you don't have to do modeling anymore. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means, but I'll do whatever you say. And he ended up giving me studio work to do, like computer stuff. And I had not much of a deficit between my job paycheck and what I needed. And he made up for it. And then we fast forward, we are married now. We've never shot together. And so I took over, he had an assistant. I took over running the studio. I was downsized from corporate in 2016. So between 2011 and 2016, I was working in various corporate jobs. And it was kind of fun to have this little secret because at that point, I'm like, if the photos are so old, if you find me online, I don't really care. And I probably wouldn't have thought that if somebody had found me. But now that I have taken over the studio, having being in corporate and knowing I had to hide everything about me. I mean, as a full-time model, this is our identity. We are a person who puts on a costume and makes ourselves beautiful and turns into a chameleon and gives the photographer exactly what they want. And we contribute this creative energy and we get them to hire us again. We become this creative force and we are really good at what we do. And that's why we can say that we are or are aspiring to be these like, full-time models and we are good enough to be able to get enough work to travel. And so I had that. And then in corporate, I had to hide it. And corporate is cycling. And so when I was downsized in 2016 and then eventually coming here, I feel like at the studio. So that was a part of me, right? The Not the part of being a model that says I'm pretty and people find me attractive. The part of being a model that says I am creative as fuck and I can do all of these really awesome things. So coming to the studio, nobody cares that I had a centerfold. Coming to the studio, nobody cares that I have magazines and box covers and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, everybody who comes to the studio is trying to do those things too. Whether they're a photographer who wants to get their photos there, or whether they're a model who is on caviar or is accumulating their hundreds of thousands of Instagram followers or whatever, everybody is doing the same thing that, excuse me, that I did previously. And I don't have to hide and I don't have to pretend that I never took my clothes off for money. And I feel like being at the studio and managing this force in the DC area has allowed me to really finally be myself. And so when I meet models, especially the traveling models, most of the time I will say, hey, I am formerly a full time traveling model. So I know what you're going through with traveling. I know how it is here. The Union 206, I have turned it into, as much as I can, a safe space where we have 3 studios. So if you're shooting with a photographer in one studio, there's always going to be staff on duty, but there could also be, 2 other shoots going. So when we meet new photographers, or if we get somebody on the fly on short notice and we don't have time to check references, I've made Union 206 into a safe space where you can go do a shoot where maybe the references didn't quite check out, but you had a cancellation, so you really need the money.
Yeah.
And I tried to I have had a couple of those shoots. I had somebody cancel on me when I was traveling to New York, and she canceled on me. And she's like, "Well, I know this guy, I'll call him, you just drive over there." And so the dude was doing basically like POV. And on that trip, the canceled shoot was the big one. And so if I didn't take this POV shoot, I was coming home without rent money.
Wow.
And so oh my gosh, that was sometime in the early 2000s and it is still out there. It's gone back multiple Google pages, but it is still there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, everybody, when you model and you have all these experiences, if you do it enough, you're gonna have that one thing that doesn't go away. And, well, hopefully not, actually. So hopefully all of you do not have that one thing that doesn't go away. But
I definitely do.
but yeah, and you just hope that people are not Googling that far. People are not clicking that many Google pages back.
Yeah.
So so that's all about me and my modeling.
Wow, thank you so much for going into depth. You're a very good speaker at recalling and sharing your story. Like I feel like I didn't even have to dive in with questions to get more detail because you're very detailed and thank you for being so vulnerable as to share your past experience with fetish and erotica because I mean a lot of people that listen to this podcast, we've done all that stuff too. So it's not it's really not that far off of the edge for, the community. But like you were saying, the corporate world on the outside would definitely lay a sideways eye to that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And people I hear these when an OnlyFans girl gets in the news, right? Like a nurse loses her whole career. It really sucks because the gatekeepers that are in charge of firing that woman,
Yeah.
I guarantee you are looking at, if not her stuff, someone else's.
Yep.
And it just, oh gosh, when I hear of those things, it just makes me cry inside. But there's so many stories where she goes on to make a ton of money. And, so hopefully those women have happy endings. Yeah, literally, of course.
So as I was listening to you recount your journey, I was just thinking about how culturally, just a few decades, what it was like to be a freelance model in your earlier era, like in the 90s and then in the early 2000s versus how it is now with social media. It is a vast difference. And I could relate to a lot of the stuff that you were saying because before social media, before models really started communicating with each other in like chat groups and stuff like that, there wasn't as much of a community and everybody was like a lone wolf, just like, getting their own shoots, Craigslist, Model Mayhem, Facebook. I guess before social media, like obviously not Facebook, but when I started, I first started in 2006 and I didn't really get invited into a community of models who were giving each other information until about 2015. So there was quite a lot of shooting in the dark and like trying to make friends. And I like before going like into these communities where I felt like I was actually a part of a community and that we all mutually respected each other, I think I did have more anxiety in my career even after I started traveling full time. I started traveling full time in 2012 due to getting fired from a job and like a bunch of other stuff happening in my life at the same time that just kind of led me to become a traveling model. But there was a lot of like tension and fear that it wouldn't work out and like fear that my nudes on the internet might ruin my career in the future forever. But having a community of people that like respect you, that like appreciate the work that you do really does help with like the emotional and mental and some might say spiritual aspect of just living in the world and having a career. So, like, as you were describing that you were having panic attacks and like worrying about your future, like you didn't have something that you felt you could put onto a resume, like the stripping and the modeling and even like the publications that you had, they were like accomplishments for you, but it wasn't something that on paper could qualify you for like a good job. So, like, would you say that now the place where you're at, where you are like working with Union 206 and you have a place there, would you say that your mental health is much better in your place now compared to before when you were going back and forth between modeling and having a corporate job?
Oh, yeah, yeah, 100%. I mean, I am secure now. So, Charles, who is the real studio owner, who is uninvolved now because I'm doing everything. I mean, he built Union 206 out of nothing. And I feel secure now because I know that. So now that I have basically been self employed for a number of years, I don't think I can go back to work for someone else because I just imagine a boss. I just imagine first, like, as hard as we work as models, right? We're self employed. And as hard as we work to make money, improve our craft, and be really good at what we do, imagine working that hard. You don't get a raise. Your boss says, good job. And the owner of the corporation gets rich, but you do not. Thinking about that, it's just hard to think about doing something else. But as far as mental health goes, so I recently started eating way more protein and not on the subject at all of modeling. But I'd always had anxiety and mood swings, etc. And I was a vegetarian. I ate stomach, ate a lot of protein. But I recently worked with a nutritionist and I started eating tons of protein. And let me tell you what, my anxiety is gone. Wow, symptoms are gone. That is a whole totally different thing. But my mental health right now, oh my God, I feel like I could do anything. That's all. As far as the modeling goes, I do not envy you at all for the world of Instagram and doing this
Yeah.
because back in my day, it was it was a different world. And I see models. I follow you guys on social media and I see that you guys are putting out so much content all the time. And I see models setting up their phones on tripods to do BTS. And so I'm a writer and I have to do these kinds of things, the writer equivalent, stay relevant, get people to notice me, and to make sure that their eyes don't stray to the next writer. Whereas you guys are getting photographers to notice and getting photographers to hire you. And I do not envy you with the world of modeling today. There were less opportunities and less photographers, and we worked really hard, but it was in a different way. And what you all are doing today is just so different. Things just seem to move so fast. Appreciate it. I is not that old, but I feel like I'm talking like, you could get off my lawn. But it's just, it is so, so, so different with the world of Instagram.
Yeah.
There was no social media for most of my time.
Right.
And so what you would do is you would make your OMP page. Most people had their own portfolio. Some people were running their own pay site, but you had to manage everything. There was not the same kinds of easy things like Square and other merchant accounts back then.
Yeah.
I do not envy you guys for all of the work that you are doing because it's so easy for anybody to decide to take her clothes off and do this and undercut you and take your jobs like we talked about. And so that's it, it was just so different in my day.
Yeah, because right now, on top of just being a good model and having experience, it's also with social media now a popularity contest.
Yeah, I have people when I talk to members and clients, people's numbers come up. How many followers does she have? And, if you're not whip smart with social media and you're not really good with, the right hashtags and whatever else it is that you do to get followers, if that's not your specialty because you're really good at being on camera, for example, or maybe you're really good at concept, but you don't excel. If you don't excel at getting followers, you somehow look less valid than the model who maybe doesn't have that good of pictures. Yeah, somehow she's got a fuck ton of followers. And so, yeah, social media has really skewed people's perceptions of how good a model is.
Yes, I agree. And that's why I think that like reputation is really important too.
Oh yeah, yeah. I hear from photographers I hear about models' reputation.
Yeah. Like, it's kind of weird, like, fortunately for me, like, I feel like after having modeled for so long and having already been to a lot of these major cities a bunch of different times, I've kind of established myself. So, I'm not worried about, like, models that are local to the area that are undercutting with lower rates because I know that the photographers that wanna work with those models aren't my target clients, but it does make it harder for newer models who are like serious and getting into traveling to establish themselves because if they have experience and they've quit their jobs and they're doing this full time like without enough followers or enough like reputation already built up, it makes it really hard to like build up at all. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I had a model just maybe last week reached out to me and oh my God, she's beautiful. And but she doesn't have that many photos and she had less than 1,000 followers. And I thought, you got some work ahead of you to build up your following because a lot of time with the photographers that their validation, that they're like, that's what they're looking for. But, come shoot at Union 206 with me when you guys come to DC and we'll get you all the shoot we could do on social media.
Yeah, totally. There are a lot of people who are getting into it now that are just amazing. They can do amazing poses. I've seen people doing like contortionist type poses, dancer photography that just if they started their Instagram within the last 3 or 4 years, they're just shadow banned as soon as they join their account. Like a lot of us that built our accounts started like over 10 years ago, and it's hard to gain any. Actually, I'm losing followers. I've been slowly losing followers for years, but because the algorithm, yeah, I used to have almost 10,000 more followers than I do now, and it's always losing because I think that maybe accounts that used to follow me over 10 years ago are just getting deleted for not being active anymore or something like that. But it is kind of frustrating how important Instagram has become because it used to just be like a supplement to our careers, but now it's like the main billboard that we use to get most of our bookings. So
Yeah, it's tricky for me because when I need to find a model, the only place that I know of to find models in a particular city is Model Mayhem. And, because you can't just go to Instagram and go models who are going to be in the DC area in March, right? But Model Mayhem has people by city. And I know that so many models are just not bothering with Model Mayhem. And so it's this, I know you're not, Model Mayhem doesn't get you any work. And so it's this conundrum for me to try to see like who's local and, are there good models that are local right now? Do I have to wait for them to travel? So that is on my end, a tricky thing with Instagram.
yeah, right. I wish that Model Mayhem never took that dive and became less popular than it is now. But honestly, if I were to, I could make a whole episode criticizing what Model Mayhem did wrong and why people don't use it anymore. But sadly, they've kind of shot themselves in the foot a few times.
I have no idea. I'd love to talk to you offline about that.
Sure.
That's a story I have not heard.
Well, mainly, I mean, for the people listening that have had Model Mayhem for a while, they could probably all relate and possibly remember this happening. But around, I think it was like 2015 or 2016, Model Mayhem changed the way they worked, where before people could just message each other. Now, since the change, they made it so that if you don't pay for a VIP account, you can't initiate a message with somebody that's not on your friends list yet. So for traveling models, when we're putting a travel notice in a city, photographers that don't pay for VIP can't just send us a message and say they want to work with us if they don't pay for VIP. They would have to send us a friend request and then wait for us to answer their friend request, and then they could message us. And it's just caused more of a burden with the communication between people on Model Mayhem. And a lot of people don't want to pay for VIP because they were able to use those features before for free. So everybody decided, let's just go on Facebook and Instagram to communicate because they don't have to pay.
Oh, I can see where that would be problematic. I spent so much time on Model Mayhem, just, wherever I was going to be searching by zip code radius
Yeah.
and just copy pasting in this, hey, I love your work. I'm going to be in your area. I'd love to get together. Oh,
Those were the days.
as we all have done. Yeah, totally.
Back when I was traveling in my beginning of my traveling, Model Mayhem like got 100% of my gigs. All I had to do to fill up my tour was just post a travel notice and that was it. No Facebook, no Instagram. It was great. But now it is like you were talking about a moment ago, you pretty much have to advertise the shit out of yourself, making reels, being active, responding to comments, promoting yourself, cold calling, and it is a lot harder than it used to be.
So can I talk for a minute about how I can make it easier for models coming to the DC area?
Yes, absolutely.
So my studio website is union206.com. We have three fantastic studios. So if you are going to be traveling to the DC area, when you are still planning your trip and you still have time in your schedule, send me an email. You can find me on Instagram, Union2006, or email me. You can find it on my website, or it's Tiffany at Union206. So when you are planning a trip, get in touch with me with all of your information, your travel date, your rates, your everything that you know what you need to send me. And I'll send you back a discount code good for 25% off studio rental. And so then you can put in your travel notices when you list your cities under DC area, 25% discount off studio rental at Union 206. When you are cold calling, emailing photographers, local photographers, you can add that in. You can put it in your socials. You can put it in your stories. And Christy, as you mentioned, you've got 7 shoots with me.
In like 4 or 5 days.
Models are diligent. Cool, cool, cool. I mean, when models are diligent, then you guys can basically park yourselves at my studio and just, if you want to do all of your shoots in 2 days, if you don't mind doing multiple shoots, just schedule everyone on the same day. Schedule everyone on 2 days apart. I'm just under a mile from the metro and we're close to stuff. So I'm walking distance to Starbucks and a bunch of stuff. And I try to be really friendly to models because 2 reasons. When I discovered Union 206, like I said, I didn't want to shoot anywhere else. We have clean restrooms and studios are clean. And for fine art, we have 2 huge bike walls. And for glamour, we've got a lot of stuff to crawl around on internet and interact with. So be in touch with me. Anyone who's got travel plans coming up, I would be happy to promote your trip. I'll give out discount codes so you guys can go forth and book shoot and be safe and not have to go to someone's house.
Thank you so much for like providing this. I mean, other places that I've been to, like I have had studios where I've had multiple shoots there, but having the organization to have had a discount code that's specific to the model to get this discount for photographers, like it incentivizes us so much to want to book shoots at your studio. And it does feel like, we're going to be part of a safe community when we're at your space. So I just want to say thank you for like being an advocate and like for reaching out. And I think that more studios should do stuff like this. Well, Tiffany, I've had such a great conversation with you. I did want to ask you, however, since we haven't gotten to this part yet, because we've been so involved in your story and your modeling and the studio and the journey, do you have any crazy stories that you would like to share from the course of your career?
So I mentioned that video that's still out there. I mentioned that there are tons and tons of fetish photo sets that are still out there. Crazy things. So once I needed money, right? And I was in the model safety group where there was a blacklist and shoots were down and I couldn't travel for a while. And so I'm like, oh, well, I will just reach out to some of the blacklist photographers
Oh, shit.
because I need the money and I'm smart. It'll never happen to me, right? And so I'm not going to say we've all done this because you guys are probably much smarter than me. So don't do this. So I end up at this guy's house and he's a hoarder and and I'm petite, right? So at that point I was 100 pounds. I'm like 5'3", right? So go to this guy's house. He's a giant man and he's a hoarder and I need the money. So there's a path from his front door, like into the house. And then there's a path down to the basement. And his studio is down in the basement. So I go in there and of course we're doing bondage, right? So I am in the Silence of the Lambs house, trying not to freak out because I need the money. And so he wants to do bondage, but with like embroidery floss. And so, of course, this takes a long time. And of course, he's sweating and shaking because I'm making him nervous, right? So he is doing this very delicate bondage, not shibari, because embroidery floss is too small. So he sweats on me. And you can tell that I've made it out alive, right? But I'm tied up with embroidery floss and he is just pouring and I can't wipe it off. I can't wipe his sweat off. And I made it out alive, obviously. But I don't think after that I decided that I was going to just use the blacklist photographers because I really needed the money. So that's not a funny story. That's maybe a story of let this be a lesson to you. You don't do that. Yeah, I don't have many funny stories. I mean, I don't know. What is a funny story about modeling? No, I don't have any funny stories about it. It was all like something really awesome happened. Oh, I have a story. So when I got my centerfold, I got a lot of work, motorcycle, was Easy Rider, right? So I got all this work, this motorcycle related work. So I got to go to this radio. You know how sometimes like a radio station will put on a music festival? Oh yeah, at a stadium. Yeah, I got to go to this, and I got to be like a celebrity there. So this root beer stand. It was like you've been driving out in the country and you see like a barbecue trailer. Yeah, it's like set up on the side of the road, and So there was a root beer trailer, right? And I don't know, I don't remember what building it was next to, but it might have been next to like a barbecue restaurant. So they're having a grand opening and they send a limo to pick me up. And so my centerfold was in the month of August, right? So this was probably like August or September. So Miss August is coming up. And so there's bikers here and it's this thing. So I go in a limo to a grand opening of a root beer stand. And so a number of these centerfold, a number of the places that I got to go to because of the centerfold, strangely enough, had my picture, a full length picture of me done as like a cardboard cutout. Oh, and it was like, I'm, you can't tell really how tall someone is when you just have a cardboard cutout of a person. Yeah. So these by three, right? But these cardboard cutouts were always like way bigger than me. And people would think that it was really cool to have me posing, smiling next to a cardboard cutout, giant cardboard cutout of myself. So floating around, there's all of these pictures of me standing next to myself. And then I did this. So I'm scared of motorcycles, right? Just, I'm not in it for the thrill. So because of that motorcycle thing, I got motorcycle shoes, and but Delaware has had at that time no helmet law. Oh. And so this little, you know how sometimes if you're going to like a bar, they're gonna have like a newspaper. It's like a free newspaper. Maybe they don't have those in the cities, but in some country areas, they might have those. So there was this free weekly, kind of like a biker thing in Delaware, and they put me on the cover, but they wanted to get this shot of me on the back of a bike. So the guy that's riding the bike, he's bald, but he has this really long flowing beard. And so there's these country roads in Delaware. And so I'm on the back of the bike, and of course, like cut off, the tiniest of cut off jean shorts, and these like strappy sandal stilettos, and some tiny tank top with, of course, my bra hanging out. And so I'm riding on the back of the bike with this dude with a bald head, and his beard is so long and flowing that it has come over his shoulder and it's like on me. And so on these long country roads, we're driving and they're driving a car next to us so that they can take the pictures for the front page of this little free weekly magazine, weekly newspaper. So that was a story, this kind of funny little I've got a guy's beard flapping on me.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
Yeah, just little adventures. I don't know how funny that is, but I guess it's a good image.
Good times, I mean, like, having a creative career, like, lends itself to having lots of interesting stories, so thank you for sharing.
Oh, yeah, 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 definitely. Well, thank you so much for listening.
You're
Don't
welcome.
get to talk about this stuff too often.
Yeah, it's fun to hear from somebody who has modeled, retired from modeling, struggled between modeling and the corporate world, but then finally found their place in the world and is happy. So, like, thank you for sharing that story. And I know that there's other models that might be listening to this that have been modeling for a really long time that do struggle with that. Like, I have a lot of modeling friends that are around my age and they are currently struggling with going back to college, getting another job, trying to find somewhere where they can like transfer to, but like nothing is as rewarding for a creative person as having some kind of a creative job where you're part of a community.
And the money is another fact.
And the money
You can't forget the money. So much money from a job
yeah.
unless it's your business.
Well, thank you so much, Tiffany. I'm going to let you go, but I'm so happy to have had this call with you, and this episode will come out soon.